All right, folks, back again for another edition of Midweek. And for those of you that might be just tuning in, I sent a message out yesterday. And I swear to you, this is not meant to be a cheap plug here, but if you haven't heard already, myself and Paul Jones, we have taken over the 1 to 2 slot Monday to Friday on Sportsnet 590 The Fan. So every weekday from Monday to Friday, 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern, Smith and Jones on the radio. As a result, I've decided to scale back this show. It's just a little bit too much, at least in terms of trying to find the work-life balance with the family, doing a show for an hour in the middle of the day, then plus committing for another hour at night. And even though it might not sound like a whole lot, there's certainly prep time involved as well. So I didn't want to take too much away from my wife and my son and my family. So I decided to scale back this show a little bit, but I didn't want to completely blow it up because of the fact that I enjoy doing it, and hopefully you've enjoyed watching it as well. And I enjoy having these conversations and kind of getting into the Q&A and the back and forth with a lot of my colleagues and people that I've had a chance to get to know a little bit better through this show as well. So I didn't want to cancel the show completely. I'm going to continue to do it on Wednesday night. So it officially is midweek now. It's not Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. It's only Wednesday, but that is officially still midweek. So every Wednesday night I will continue to do the show. And hey, if the daytime show ultimately goes away at some point once the NBA season is back full time, or once we're back into some semblance of normalcy in the world, I've got to imagine that at some point Hockey Central will return to the 2-hour slot as opposed to the 1-hour slot. And probably Smith and Jones maybe doesn't last forever. Who knows? Maybe it goes on for a long time. I don't know. It's kind of very fluid at the moment. But again, for the time being, Monday to Friday, 1 to 2, myself and Jonesy, we're on every day on Sportsnet 590 The Fan, and then I will do this show every Wednesday. Now, my guest tonight is going to be Mike Wilner, Blue Jays broadcaster on Sportsnet 590 The Fan. Covered the Toronto Blue Jays and Major League Baseball and multiple sports for quite some time, but certainly focused in on baseball primarily for a long time. And he is not on Instagram, so as I've used for a couple of other guests that have joined me on this show, I set up a guest account that folks like Mike can log into. And I gave him the tutorial, I gave him the lowdown on how to do this, and I have yet to see him join us. And it's a few minutes after 10. So hopefully Mike joins in. And when I see the guest account come in, I will try and hold his hand and walk him through this and get him logged in and have him join me. But I am not seeing his name pop up quite yet. So hello to all of you that have waved and said hello, Mark and Chris and the Rock Russo and Ann, so many others that have joined the program. I appreciate you checking out the show tonight. And again, as soon as Mike comes into the mix, I will endeavor to get him in. In fact, I might have to, at some point, put this on pause or scroll down and text him, because I do the show through my phone, so I can't really text him or send him a WhatsApp while I'm talking to you. So hopefully Mike figures this out. Zelko, Taylor, good to see you. Again, hopefully Wilner figures this out and we can get things rolling. I'm glad I have Mike on, because I'll be honest with you, and I can repeat this if or when, hopefully when we get Mike. I can repeat this. I kind of questioned myself earlier today thinking, dummy, I should have probably had a basketball guest on, given the fact that today is the 1-year anniversary of the Toronto Raptors championship parade. But at the same time, in the last 2 weeks, we were talking Raptors championship memories. I had on Jonesy, Sherm, Matt Devlin, Leo Routon. So I've had all of my guys on, all of my fellow broadcasters. So I figure, you know what? Why bother talking more basketball? I spent a lot of time on the radio show talking about it, and baseball is certainly a relevant topic for this one tonight, because of the fact that we finally, it looks like, again, fingers crossed, it looks like we've got some baseball to talk about, and finally a return to the Major League Baseball season to discuss as well. So we'll get into Mike's career. We'll talk about stories throughout the course of his career, but also we'll start things off by trying to talk some actual baseball, as Major League Baseball finally seems to have gotten its head out of its you-know-what and finally gotten things on track. So I did see Mike join in here. I'm just scrolling back as I kind of wax poetic here for a second. I'm going to add him into the mix here if I can. Where is it here? I'm scrolling down. Where did the name go? Nope, it doesn't seem like I can do it here. Hold on. Why is this not working for me? The beauty of live Instagram here, folks. I see his name. I see him there, but I can't seem to add him into the mix here. And I really don't know why, folks, because when I scroll through the names, the Eric Smith guest account is not coming up. So, Mike, I don't know if you can figure this out, but if you can actually either log out, come back in, I'll try and add you again, or there should be a little tab where you can request to join the conversation, and I will do it that way. So hopefully, Mike, if you're still watching, that will work out, and we can bring you in here. Because when I scroll through, I'm not seeing your name pop up there. Coach Mitch, good to see you. Thanks for checking it out. I promise it's usually a little bit smoother than this. There we go. Let's see. I see Eric Smith, guest. There we go. Ken, good to see you as well. JR, Rosan, Anna, thank you. And Mike, it should be popping up on your end right now. All you have to do is hit yes, and there you go. Now we got to get you to move sideways. You're flipped, so we got to get you to go turn the other way, because you're sideways on my screen right now.
But you're straight up on my screen.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, trust me, we don't want this.
All right, let's see what we got. A little tripod action happening here.
Now, am I sideways, or are we good?
Now we're good, but I have to put you in the tripod. So hold. Oh.
Okay, that's all right. It's all good. It's all good.
Doesn't seem to want to work here. So we might have to do the old properoo here.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll give you a second to figure this out.
I think that'll
work. There we go.
Yeah.
All right.
The whole display that I set up for you, though, on my right is.
Oh well, now you got to give me a little scroll to have a look. Oh, the bobblehead collection. Nice. See, I've given my bobblehead collection over the years to my barber at Village Cigar in Oakville, because he displays them on his mirror. And whether it's Blue Jays, Raptors, or otherwise, I don't own the bobbleheads anymore. And I need to get back to see my guy Harry real soon, as it looks like you need to.
I do too. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, you need to go see somebody as well. Yeah. Mike, for folks that don't know as well, this is Mike Wilner's maiden voyage on Instagram Live. So we appreciate him joining us and figuring things out technologically.
On Instagram, period. Never mind live.
That's true. He had to download the app just so that he could use the guest account that I set up for him, let alone actually figure out Instagram Live to get on here. So we appreciate you doing this. Thank you for that, Mike. And let's start off. Normally, as folks know that are regular viewers to the show, I spend almost the entire hour talking about people's careers, and I want to get into your story and how everything unfolded for you. But with due respect to you, there are more topical issues right now, at least coming out in just the last couple of hours, if not less. John Heyman and others, multiple reports coming out of Major League Baseball that it looks like, Mike, finally, the owners and the players have come to some sort of an agreement, and it looks like we finally will have some baseball to watch this summer and into the fall. And I read your tweet, which kind of laid it out perfectly, which essentially, and I'm paraphrasing here a little bit, but it was about a week and a half ago, that you were 100% convinced, like so many of us, that there was going to be baseball. Then just a few days ago, we were about 75 to 85% convinced there's going to be no baseball. And now we're back again to, it looks like we're going to have baseball.
Yeah, I would say I'm at about 95% now that there's going to be a season. I think Heyman might have jumped the gun a little bit in his excitement to break a story of an agreement. It seems like the framework of an agreement has been decided on with that face-to-face meeting between Rob Manfred, the commissioner, and Tony Clark, the head of the Players Association, in Arizona today. But now we're hearing that the players want more than 60 games, and the owners aren't sure whether they'll go more than 60 games, but at least they're speaking the same, they're on the same planet now. They're speaking the same language, which is something that was not going on the weekend. So it really is good news. And it looks as though the season will start, assuming virus safety issues. And there are 11 major league teams, 12 if you count the Blue Jays playing in Florida, 12 major league teams in the top 4 states for the coronavirus right now. So that may throw a wrench into this whole thing. But it appears as though it'll be a schedule of somewhere between 60 and 70 games. There will be a DH in the National League. There will be expanded playoffs to 16 teams from 10. And I mean, it looks like we're going to have baseball. It's going to be a sprint, not a marathon, which is a weird thing and completely different. And yes, when we look back, I mean, when anybody looks back at 2020, we're going to say, well, that whole year was screwed up sports-wise. So I'm not worried about a legitimate champion or anything like that. But yeah, I'm very hopeful now, where 48 hours ago I was not at all.
Okay, lots to sift through here, Mike. So let's spend some time on this. And as you know, as most of the people watching know, I'm a big baseball fan. If I wasn't doing basketball, I would love to be broadcasting baseball games, covering baseball, just simply watching baseball. I love baseball. That said, you and I have gone back and forth on this on personal time and on the air as well over the years. What are your thoughts on, well, you know what? I'm going to go through this bullet by bullet. First, your thoughts on a 60-game season. Because I'm of the opinion that, hey, you clearly can't play 162. There's just not enough time. And it's not going to be safe to do so. But whereas in hockey and basketball, you had the luxury of the NHL and the NBA, respectively, having already played essentially 2/3, if not almost close to 3/4 of their season. The NFL doesn't start until September. So they've still got some time to figure this out. And they only play once a week. They only play a 16, 17, game schedule. It looks like that's probably going to be okay, and they're going to be able to get by. Whereas baseball, is a 60-game season really comparable or relevant to what we're used to seeing in terms of 162? And then that brings up, for a lot of people, of course, the asterisk question that is already being applied to or asked about the NHL and the NBA, who, again, have already played the major bulk of their season. How do you feel about Major League Baseball and crowning a champion a few months from now, crowning a World Series champion based on a 60-game season?
Honestly, I don't care. I really don't. I just want to watch games. I want to be able to broadcast them. I want there to be baseball. And, 60 games doesn't test your depth hardly at all. And it makes any sort of injuries way more important. When you lose a guy for 30 games out of 162, you got to overcome it. But if you lose a guy for 30 out of 60, that's half your season, and you're kind of screwed depending on who it is. So the things that make you win, that lead to a team winning over 162 games, are not the things that'll lead to a team winning over 60 games. But the truth of the matter is, things that lead to 162 games, the things that lead to a team showing how good it is over 162 games, are also not the things that lead to a team winning a best of 5 or a best of 7. And that's how we crown our champions, right? So I've always thought of October as a postseason tournament. I remember, when I was a little more militant about things, I used to say that play 162 games, playoffs start on October 1st. You have the best team in the National League, the best team in the American League, and you play a best of October with no off days. And whoever wins the month is the champion, and that's a true test. But in the playoffs, you don't need a 5th starter. You barely even need a 4th starter. In the playoffs, you don't need to have 7 decent relievers. You can get by with 3 or 4. So it's just, we have to think of it like a tournament. And whoever has the best October wins. Whoever has the best week wins a playoff series, not whichever team is better. So it'll be sort of the same thing this year. And maybe this will allow us, especially if these expanded playoffs happen and they stick around. If we're going to have 16 teams in playoffs in baseball, there will be teams that are under 500 making the playoffs, and there will be teams that are under 500 getting to the World Series, because it's baseball. I don't know what the deal is in the NBA. I think if 2 teams are playing in the NBA, one is significantly better, and that significantly better team is at home, it's going to win 90 or more % of the time. In baseball, that team's going to win 58% of the time. So, it depends on who has a good day, what pitcher's on the mound, who kicks a ball once, and who gets a big hit in a big spot. So hopefully we can start to think of October as a tournament to determine that year's World Series winner. not a test to see who the best team in baseball was that year, because most of the time, the best team in baseball doesn't win the World Series. And I guarantee you that will happen in 2020.
I like the fact that you mentioned the comparison or the idea of the tournament kind of philosophy, because, and I don't know that everybody necessarily believes this, Mike, but so many people will view March Madness and the NCAA tournament as the ultimate test of sports, the ultimate excitement of sports, the one and done, and how crazy it can be, the flurry of activity in just a few weeks in March to crown a champion. And you could have the most amazing regular season in college basketball, but ultimately, if you don't have what it takes and if you're not there with your top game in that opening round, you're bounced, you're done, and it's over. And you might have the Cinderella story going to the Elite Eight, to the Final Four, to the championship, to winning the whole thing. We think about, a junior hockey tournament. We think about the Calder Cup and whatnot. You just spoke about the lack of upsets that we maybe see in basketball, but we've seen more upsets in hockey. So I asked the question of you, but I wasn't asking that coming from the standpoint of I don't like it. It was more to generate conversation, because I actually like this 60-game format, and also like the fact that it's simply we have baseball back. And part of the reason that I don't think that the NBA should have an asterisk either, let's forget about the fact that they already played 65, 66, 68 games. They're going to be ended up playing roughly 72 when all said and done. The fact is, it's the same slate for every team. So whether it's 40 games, 60 games, 80 games, 120 games, everybody is playing under the same rules, under the same format, under the same amount of games. There is no clear advantage for one team over the other. So yes, we were the champion in this season in which it was the same for everybody. And yes, it's different than seasons in the past, but we've never encountered this in the history of professional sports, trying to deal with a pandemic to this magnitude. And also, we're making it more competitive to the point where we're trying to balance things out in terms of adding more playoff teams then, which as much as we're taking away from the regular season, we're adding to the postseason, adding to that competitiveness. I love it. I think it's outstanding, and I hope it's something that sticks in seasons to come. Maybe not 60 games, but certainly less games and more playoffs.
I'd be fine with 144 games or something like that, and more teams in the playoffs. But the people who are just sitting back and saying, well, this isn't going to be a legitimate season. Yeah, 2020 has an asterisk on it. Not just in baseball or basketball or hockey, just in life. 2020 is a lost year of life for a lot of people. And so it's not like we're ever going to look back and say, oh yeah, remember they won in 2020? Man, they must have been the best team ever. If the Blue Jays have if Vlad and Bo and Biggio and Gurriel and Jansen have a terrific couple of months, and Nate Pearson and Hyunjin Ryu are the backbone of a really good starting rotation, and they win the World Series, is anybody going to say, yeah, you know what, 27 Yankees, 2020 Blue Jays, those are equivalent teams? Of course not, but that's okay. Sports is fun, you know that. I'm preaching to the choir here, but it's just supposed to be a good time, and the fact that we're going to have it back, hopefully, is wonderful news regardless. There doesn't need to be this grand air of legitimacy on the champions of all the major sports.
Now, the one thing that we've glazed over a little bit here.
And by the way, Eric, I should mention,
go ahead.
We did have cheaters win 2 of the last 3 World Series, so let's not forget that.
Yes. Fair point, Mike. Absolutely fair point. We glazed over a little bit here the fact that, and correct me if I'm wrong, you have been very down on the idea of expanding the playoffs in years gone by. And I have going back to when I used to have a radio show, like more than a decade ago, we've come full circle. Here we are now. I'm back on the radio doing a show, and I'm still trumpeting more teams in the playoffs, expand baseball's playoff format. Finally, it took a pandemic for it to happen. 16 teams in the playoffs, but now, at least based on the word that's coming out, it's 16 teams in the playoffs for 2020 and 2021. I'm not sure why they added the extra. Maybe you can explain that to me.
Because the owners want the dough.
Okay, and that makes sense, which leads me then to my next question is it then 2022 and 23 and for the rest of time? How do you think that this plays out?
It might be. It might be. I still don't love it. I mean, all those times where we debated expanding the playoffs, you'll remember I had never covered a playoff game while covering the Blue Jays,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So, I mean, started in 2001. You were already at the Fan. I think there's only I think you're number one now, aren't you, on
I
the
am.
seniority list? Yeah.
I am the old man. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
and I'm number
Yeah.
two.
Yeah.
But yeah, so all those times, I had never even been really through a playoff run as a broadcaster. And then 15 and 16 happened, and how wonderful that was. The thing is, though, for baseball, the difference for me is that in a best 3 out of 5, which is what the first round of the playoffs has been, though there's talk with this new agreement that every round might be a best of 7. But with a best 3 out of 5, it honestly, 1,000% doesn't matter which team is better. Flip a coin, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so over 162 games, if you work hard for 162 games and you win a division and then you get bounced by a 68-win team, it doesn't really seem fair. And it's going to happen. And it'll happen in baseball a lot more often than it happens with other teams. And I think that could also lead to a lot more apathy from the fans about the regular season, because it won't matter. I mean, there's apathy in Atlanta about even making the playoffs. Nobody used to show up in the first round for the Braves games once they were in their like 8th, 9th, 10th straight year of winning the National League East. So I'm really afraid that expanding the playoffs will make the regular season count a lot less, will make things be a lot less exciting, will put a lot more teams in cruise control late, and then flip a coin. It's going to be fun for the Cinderella stories, because it always is. But how fair is it to the teams that really built themselves up to be powerhouses, to be, every once in a while, whatever, that happens, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
to be
yeah.
regularly bounced in the first round is it's not a good thing.
Do you think that, and I mean, this is a bigger question beyond just 2020 and COVID-19 and the pandemic. Do you think that baseball ultimately, putting everything you just said makes sense, Mike, but putting your own personal feelings and baseball historia aside for a second, do you think that baseball currently needs this, if for no other reason than to generate and cultivate and grow and excite the fan base overall? Because I know it's an age-old argument, but even for a baseball guy like me who loves the game, I'm not interested in watching a lot of games or paying my money more specifically. I might sit at home and still watch a game or listen to a game sitting in the backyard or in the car or otherwise, because I'm still a fan of the game. But to spend my money, to go down and spend X amount of dollars for a ticket and X amount of dollars for a beer and a hot dog and everything else, to go down in the middle of July or certainly in the first week of August with still 2+ months left in the season, to say I'm going down to watch the game and to spend all this money for a team that's 10, 15, 20 games out of the playoffs that has no hope in hell of making the postseason, just because I love the game. It's not happening. And in today's climate, it's not happening for a lot of people.
But that doesn't happen a lot. There aren't a lot of times where you're 10, 15 games out, especially with the second wild card now in the middle of July. Even the Blue Jays lost 95 games last year. I don't think they were 10 games out in the middle of July. I think, though, that you could flip that, and the same thing applies to, let's say they cut to 144. It's 16-team playoffs. So now the season's over September 15th. So on August 18th, your team's pretty locked into 5th place. You're going to make the playoffs. You're not going to catch anybody. Nobody's going to catch you. Same argument, right? I mean, how interested are you then?
Well, listen, to use the comparison, and I hear you, but I guess to use the comparison or the example of the NBA or the NHL, there is still quite a bit of movement in the standings in the final few weeks, even few games of the season. So I still think my only counter to your argument, I guess, would be that as much as the Jays might not have been 10 games back, listen, I don't have the numbers in front of me.
No, we all thought they were done. You're right. We all thought they were done at the end of June.
But if there were 8 teams in, they might have actually been in a playoff spot, or they weren't 8 games out of essentially 5th or 6th. They were 2 games out of 8th. So now there is more reason, because it's, hey, we might be the dead last team, but there's still a chance. So it generates some excitement, and it gives reason and hope and opportunity, and thus gives reason and hope and opportunity to fans to come down and for organizations then to have that money spent on their team. And I guess that's where I just wonder where, listen, I don't think baseball's dying or going to die, but I think it certainly needs to recognize that it might have lost some of its foothold with the fan base, and it needs to do a little bit more to kind of regenerate this generation.
I think all that is true. I think that, I've said a couple of times over the last few weeks, in 20 years, baseball might be horse racing, the way that things, they keep shooting themselves in the foot, although it looks like they're going to pull back from the precipice. But then, we're going to worry next year when the CBA is up,
Right.
what's going to happen. But this cooperation is nice at least. But, you're right. But the things you're saying will apply to the teams that are like 6th to 11th, and the teams that are 1st to 5th, and the teams that are 12th to 15th. They're gonna be the same thing. There's always going to be that until everybody gets closer to the middle. And if you had a system, and the beauty for one of the things I've railed against the last few years is just tanking. When it used to be you'd come to spring training hoping you could win, thinking you might win, or knowing you were going to win. Now
Right.
you go to spring training knowing you're going to win, knowing you're going to be terrible, and trying to stay out of the middle, one or the other. So 8 teams in the playoffs in each league probably discourages tanking a great deal, which I think is awesome, and which may raise that bottom tier up so that even the team that finishes second last is still 4 games out on Labor Day, and it's still worth going to see.
How much do you think this current 60 game, assuming everything goes right, this current 60 game season and the expanded playoffs, how much do you think it could serve as a blueprint for the negotiations in the CBA next year and for baseball moving forward? And when I say that, not only just the expanded playoffs, but perhaps a reduction in games, as we've discussed a little bit. Perhaps do we see the DH going into both leagues? Do we see realignment of divisions? Do we see a balanced schedule? Do you think a lot is on the table as we look ahead to next year and trying to hammer out a new deal?
I hope so. I think that we've seen the last of pitchers hitting. There's going to be a
Okay.
universal DH if baseball comes back this year and next year. That's part of the agreement, is that the DH will be in the National League at least the next 2 years, and I don't think there's any going back. Once they decide to do that. So there's that. I pulling the schedule back and expanding the playoffs is not going to be easy to get by the players, because owners are going to say, if we're cutting games off the regular season, we're going to cut your pay accordingly. And players are going to say, well, hold on a sec, you're expanding the playoffs, so you make the money in the playoffs, we don't. So, it's not as bad as it is in hockey, where they play for free basically in the playoffs. And basketball, I'm not quite sure what the deal is. Baseball, they get a cut of the gate, but the team that wins the World Series generally gets about 300 or 400 grand per player, which is a massive pay cut for the better players. So, that's going to be a money fight right there. But other innovative things, I mean, I would love geographical realignment. And I remember last year, a couple of times, Ben Nicholson Smith and I were sitting in the media dining room before the game, and we were scrolling out what our divisions would look like, with 2 expansion teams and 8 divisions of 4 and 16 teams in each league. I would love, first of all, to see the Blue Jays not have to deal with the Yankees and Red Sox a million times a year and fight for the same playoff spots as other people. But, I mean, imagine if, Tampa Bay moves to Montreal and they do it a little earlier. Maybe this 60-game schedule with no fans puts the screws to Tampa Bay a little bit more. And I don't know, but you imagine a division with like Toronto, Detroit, Montreal, Boston. That would be outstanding. So radical realignment, I am all for. If you have a universal DH, you don't have to really care about the sanctity of the National League and the American League anymore. And it's
Right.
not like Houston and Milwaukee haven't switched anyway in the last 20-something years. So I would love for it to be not just, hey, let's sit down and fight over money, and more like, let's sit down and try to figure out a way to improve everything so that we all make buckets of money for the next however many years.
Two questions based on what you just talked about. I know it's a bit of a tired discussion to some extent, but you brought up Tampa Bay, Montreal. How realistic is that prospect or that option still? And if Major League Baseball is to expand, what two cities do you think baseball expands to?
Well, I think you got to figure out Oakland and Tampa Bay first,
Okay.
because they may move. Like Oakland defaulted on its rent, I think, in May. So post-pandemic, everything could be different, and that's the thing. Like, if you had asked me if Tampa Bay, Montreal was workable on March 1st, I would have said absolutely. Now, I don't know. It depends on what happens, how the economy comes out. Are they going to be able to build a ballpark still in Montreal? Are they still going to be able to build a new ballpark in Tampa? Because that's part of what this thing was contingent upon. I like the idea a little. I like the idea of playing in Tampa in April and May, in Montreal, June, July, and August, or even stay in Tampa to the middle of June, get out of Florida for hurricane season and get out of Florida for when it's just so, the heat is so oppressive. You can't be outside, and then you can have an outdoor ballpark in Tampa. You can have an outdoor ballpark in Montreal because you're only playing there in the summer, and both those things would be great. But again, who knows what the economy is going to look like, and if it'll even be feasible to build those stadiums. If it's even feasible to have a ball club in Tampa Bay. I'm not sure they really like baseball that much in Florida, other than spring training and when the Yankees come to town. And the Marlins don't draw either, so who knows? But the pandemic generally, or definitely, just throws a monkey wrench into all of that. If they were to share Tampa and Montreal, I could see Oakland moving to Vegas if it comes to that, and I would be in favor of that. And for a couple of expansion teams, I mean, the cities that usually pop up are like Portland and Raleigh-Durham, something along those lines. I think it could work. It would be nice for Seattle to have a team that's closer than a 2-hour flight. It would be nice for the East Coast, sort of the middle of the East Coast, to have something between DC and Atlanta. So it feels like those are places where baseball could expand to.
Do you think baseball would ultimately do 2 relocations and 2 expansions? I mean, I don't know that necessarily would happen all at once, but would their expansion, quote unquote, be simply relocation? We're not expanding the league, but we are welcoming in 2 new franchises in terms of, as you said, hypothetically, Tampa going to Montreal, Oakland going to Vegas, and not simply expanding in addition to that.
I think it always comes back to dough, right?
Money.
You don't get expansion fees if you just relocate teams. So I do think that, and I don't like that there are 15 teams in each league, so that you need to have interleague every night. I think that it would be better to have an even number of teams in each league. They're not gonna dissolve the leagues and just have one 32 team or 30 team mess. So I do think that the goal is to get to 16 and 16.
Okay. Last question for you potentially on this before we get into Mike Wilner. The NBA, and by no means is this a guarantee, but even before the pandemic, there was discussion that the National Basketball Association may be looking to change their calendar. And there was a lot of discussion about that there is support amongst a great deal of the NBA Board of Governors. Now that COVID-19 has hit and the NBA season looks like it's going to start July 30th and end sometime around middle of October, right around Canadian Thanksgiving, with an abbreviated off season of 6 to 8 weeks tops, with next season, hopefully, obviously with health being the number one factor, hopefully starting either December 1st or January 1st. Either way, next season at the very least is going to spill over into the summertime yet again, where instead of the season ending in April and then the postseason going until the middle of June, it will likely be that the season goes into mid to late May, if not early June, with the season ending in July or August. And that maybe sets the blueprint for the NBA for years to come to simply say, that's what we're doing. We're going to get away from the bulk of the National Football League season. We're going to get away from the bulk of the NCAA football season. We're going to have to still go toe-to-toe and compete with the NCAA basketball. But we're going to be able to cut into the monopoly that Major League Baseball currently has outside of MLS and WNBA. Baseball doesn't have a whole lot of competition in the summertime, and the NBA could cut into that and cut into its fan base and obviously ticket buyers. How much do you think baseball is cognizant, fearful, aware of that possibility, and how do you think they react as a business?
I think cognizant and aware. I don't think fearful.
Okay.
I think there's lots of entertainment dollar to go around, or at least again there used to be. People have a lot less disposable income now than they've had in generations.
Yeah.
So we'll see. But I think that baseball's always competed against the NBA's postseason, so that doesn't change. The regular season goes a little bit longer, but people want to be outside in the summer, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, people are still going to want to be inside an arena to watch their team in the playoffs. That's for sure. But people want to be outside in the summer, and I think that will carry a lot of people to stick with baseball. And I don't know how much overlap in the Venn diagram there is between diehard baseball fans and diehard basketball fans, and I think there's plenty of sports to go around. But I mean, baseball really only has July to itself, right? Because the NFL starts to go to camp in August, and there's preseason games all through the month of August. So I don't think there's an eminent domain or anything. I don't think baseball has manifest destiny to have the summer all to itself. And the only problem is you and I will be competing for airtime. But we'll I welcome it. I mean, I haven't had much more fun in the last few years than watching the Raptors win Game 6 in the Blue Jays clubhouse in Baltimore in the middle of the baseball season.
Right. That was, I'll tell you, just to quickly go back, they do have their own NBA visitors locker room at Oracle Arena, and obviously they don't play there anymore. It's the new Chase Center in San Francisco. But last year at Oracle, the Raptors do have an NBA locker room that is not the same one that the Blue Jays use. However, to your point, where the pictures were being taken and where the trophy was being held and where a lot of the celebrations went on afterwards, that was the spot. That was the place. And it was incredible. It's incredible to think. Like, as I said, and I won't divert too much off the baseball path here, Mike, but I can't believe for as slow as the last 3 to 4 months have been and as the world has grinded to a halt, I still can't believe that an entire year has passed since the championship, let alone a year ago today being the parade with 2.5 million people in downtown Toronto. It's just, it boggles my mind that it's been 12 months already.
Well, I watched you in that parade and I watched the coverage, and it was an amazing day. But honestly, from my end, it feels like 3-4 years ago, and it feels like 15 since the bat flip. So there you go.
That's a good point, Mike. Where did it all start for you? Let's as we shift here to you, and we've only gotten 20 minutes, but it's been a fabulous 40 minutes so far, and I appreciate the insight and trying to make sense of this good news. We think with the 60-game season, but where did it all start for you? Coming out of college and trying to grind your way to get your way to where you are now.
I got to tell you, 2 winters ago, or maybe it might have been last winter, I don't know. I went to a Seneca College class to talk to them at spring training for fans that Bill Humber, who's a Canadian Baseball Hall of Famer, runs. And they asked, how'd you get started? And 70 minutes later, I was finished the answer.
Well, you have 20 on the nose.
So it wasn't even coming out of college. It was going into college. It was my first week at the University of Toronto. Frosh Week, and we were getting acclimated with the school, and there was this thing called Clubs Day, and they filled this hall with a bunch of booths of different clubs and things that students could do. I went to U of T thinking I'm going to be an accountant or a lawyer. I was in the Bachelor of Commerce program, and I saw the radio station booth, and I thought, oh, this would be cool. I'd never considered it, never entertained that notion, never fantasized that I was going to be a sportscaster or anything like that. I mean, I was the kid who went to sleep with this speaker under the pillow, listening to Tom and Jerry call ball games. But that was as far as it went. And you predate me at the Fan, so you'll remember this name. Tim Haffey was
Yes.
the guy who was the sports director at U of T Radio at the time. And we talked, and he said, what can you do, and whatever. And we came out of it that I was going to do the sports following the newscast on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday mornings, 9, 10, 11, and noon on CIUT, 89.5 FM, 50,000 watts of power, Barrie to Buffalo, Kitchener to Cobourg. And the first day I went in, the first story I did on the first sportscast I ever did was Ben Johnson giving back his gold medal. It
Wow.
was the Monday after the Friday that the race was run. So while I was at U of T Radio, I finagled a Blue Jays pass, and I don't have to tell you, but for all the people who are watching and listening, the media passes have your picture on it, your name and your affiliation. The Blue Jays gave us a pass with a blank picture spot. It said generic on it and CIUT. So that was how I covered my first game. I was generic at the X. The first games I covered were at the X. By the middle of my first year, I was doing color on a few hockey games. By the second year, Haffey had left. His number 2 had left. So I'm 19 years old, and I'm the sports director of a 50,000 watt radio station somehow. I was doing play-by-play hockey, and in 1990, so this was my second year, 1990, we hosted the CIAU, is what it was back then, National Hockey Champions. So I'm sitting at a table calling national championship hockey, and beside me at another table is Paul Romanuk calling the games for TSN. It was insane. I'm trying to make this short.
No, please don't. We got lots of time.
From there, there was a little political dispute at the radio station. There was always a faction that was university radio and a faction that was community radio. I eventually had a sports talk show Tuesdays and Thursdays at noon for half an hour, and one of those days we were followed by the anarchists, and as part of the community, and I made fun of them all the time. And I used to say, look, if you're really an anarchist, you don't have a half-hour radio show that starts at 12:30. You go on when you want, you finish when you want, you go on for as long as you want. But I mean, it wasn't the anarchists that were fighting us, but there were community stuff. They started to sabotage our live events. They cut wires at Varsity Arena in the middle of a hockey game I was doing once. So after my third year, the radio station dropped university sports entirely, and I went to work for what is now the phys ed, but what was then the Department of Athletics and Recreation. And I became the public address announcer, and I did PA for basketball with Jonesy doing games right beside me. We go back that far, me and Paul Jones. I did PA, and I was a minor official too. I was the official scorer for basketball, for hockey, for volleyball. I even did a water polo game. And through that point in time, that's what got me back into radio, because I remember interning at the Fan in 1993 for a month. Okay. Scott Metcalf was the sports director there. Nelson was running the show. Steph Smythe was in there doing the news. Jory Middlestat was hosting a show on overnights. I would screen calls for Rumac with Ira Haberman, and George was on the board. It's Strombo was really something even back then. So that's when I interned, but I remember talking to Metcalf, and I think Elliot was an intern at the same time as I was. I don't remember Merrick. I don't think I crossed paths with him. You weren't around back then, I don't think.
No, a couple more years. Yeah.
Yeah. But Elliot and I were interns at the same time, Elliot Friedman. And I remember talking to Metcalf and saying, look, I was a sports director for U of T radio. We were a 50,000 watt station. I did this, 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 and this. And he said, yeah, none of that counts. And Scott Metcalf is the nicest guy in the world.
He's the best. Yeah.
He is. He absolutely is the best. And he said, it wasn't commercial radio. It doesn't matter. So I interned there for about a month, and I got sick of like taking calls for Rumac at 2 a.m. And I kind of felt like, I've done a lot. They should be giving me more to do. I don't remember how it ended, but it didn't end poorly. And I went back and just did my U of T stuff. And then the next year, Paul Carson, who was the sports information director for U of T, with whom I called the Oshawa-Ottawa 3 overtime Memorial Cup game where Eric Lindros played in 1988, or 80, it must have been 89. Paul Carson decided he didn't want to deal with the wire services anymore. Part of his back then, when there was no internet, kids, back then we had to actually phone in the results from the university games to the papers and the radio stations. So Carson didn't want to do it anymore. He told me I had to do it. I was like, all right, fine, I'll get $20 a game. Why not? I'll do this too. And I called the Fan, and Haffey answered because he was at the Fan now. And I told him, hey, U of T beat whoever, and here's the score. And he said, do you want to give me 30 seconds on it? And I thought, really? But sure. So I gave him 30 seconds, and he played it on the Fan, and I was like over the moon that day. And then the next weekend, I did it again, and I called Haffey, and he said, give me 30 seconds. And then I called 680 News, and I don't know who answered the phone. Still don't know. I owe her my career, but I don't know who it was. And I said to her, hey, can I give you 30 seconds on the game? And she said, sure, and taped it, and I did it. I don't know if it even got on the air. But 3 days later, Paul Carson calls me and says, hey, Peter Gross, who's the sports director at 680, heard your report, and he wants to meet you. So I came in, I auditioned for Gross. He had me write a sportscast blind and record it like inside 15 minutes. And it came out of it, and he said, we don't have any openings right now, but the next one we do, you're getting. Wow. And yeah, so I was like, that was insane. That was in the fall of 1994, and July 1st, 95, he calls me and he says, we got an opening to do weekends and evenings. Go out and do reporting and do sports a couple of times a week, and here you are. And I said, sure, let me just see if I can get my shift at the Pickle Barrel covered. I couldn't, and they fired me. And it was the fourth time the Pickle Barrel had fired me, but the last, which was nice. Yeah. And I started at 680, and I was at 680 from 95 until in 1999 I got moved I got moved to full-time if I would be the morning show news writer. So I was a morning show news writer, which means come in at 1 a.m. and work till 11 for 6 weeks. And I said, I can't do this anymore. I just can't. Yeah. And at the same time, I think they moved James Monroe from sports to business, and they had a spot for me in sports. So I was a full-time sports guy. Then in 2001, this new Sportsnet radio network started, and Jim Lang was running it. And he called me at 680 and said, hey, do you want to work for us? And he offered me like 33% more than I was getting at 680 and better hours. And, I was working noon to 7 at that time at 680. And he offered me like 3 to 7. And I kind of went back and forth with him for a little while. And he said, Sportsnet, at this time was CTV Sportsnet, we're also going to be doing some NHL games, and you could do the second intermission on our TV games. And I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. And that had me the next day. I think Scott Ferguson calls me, or Scott Metcalf calls me, and he says, hey, I remember when you interned here 8 years ago, you were really into baseball. Scott Ferguson just quit do you want that job?
Wow. I
Yeah,
didn't even know that. I didn't realize that it happened that kind of quickly, bluntly. Anyways,
yeah.
go ahead.
Well, I
Yeah.
mean, it did, but then I had
Yeah.
the interview with Nelson.
Yeah.
Um, and they kind of they left me hanging for about a month till they offered it to me. But there was no way I was going to do evening sports and second intermission of hockey games when I had a chance to be what Scott Ferguson was, right?
Sure.
Uh,
Sure. Sure.
so when I walked in um, to Nelson's office, that first interview, super nervous, and
Hmm. Hmm.
he's a big small talker and a schmoozer, and we chatted, and he said, "Where'd you grow up?" And I said, Bathurst Manor. And he said, "Oh, me too." He said, "What street?" And I said, "Searle." And he said, "No way, me too. What house?" And I told him the address, and he said, "That's my house."
What?
And it turned out that in 1974, my parents bought that house from the Millmans.
Come on. I didn't know that.
And I moved into Nelson's bedroom. And Nelson's room was my room from when I was 4 to when I was 8.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So
That is
then
wild.
that's insane. So then 2001, we didn't have the rights at the Fan because they were at Headline Sports. That's why Fergie left. So I
Yeah.
spent a year doing being the beat guy for the Jays and doing updates and occasional hosting. And then 2002, I'm driving down to spring training and I'm like just outside Atlanta with my then wife and my then 5-month-old daughter, who is now right there in her room and 18. And the phone rings and it's Nelson. And I figure he just wants to, get me ready for spring training or whatever. And he says, "We got the rights back for the Jays because Rogers bought the team. And you're going to be the third man in the booth and the pre and post game show host."
Wow.
And, the rest is just insanity, I guess.
That is pretty wild. I mean, I didn't know half those details. So this
There
is
you
why I love
go.
doing this thing. I love doing this stuff. I mean, the Nelson component is just
That's
bonkers.
crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, that's beyond wild. Um, all right, it's like 8 minutes left, and it's a hard out at the top of the hour. Instagram chops you and cuts you right off, Mike. Um, how did the relationship form with Tom and Jerry, and with no disrespect to Jerry, I know you were that much closer to Tom over the years as well. Was that just kind of through reps, through working together? I mean, how did it evolve over the course of the years to what it ultimately became?
When it started, it was really interesting because Jerry really wanted to take me under his wing. Jerry's been doing this a long time, and Jerry has a system for doing it that really, really works well for him. Didn't necessarily work as well for me, but he tried to he gave me every piece of advice you could possibly give me. He wanted me to have the full benefit of his experience of having 24 years or 22 years in a big league booth at that point in time when I started, and that was really, really wonderful. And Tom just sort of sat back and watched me. And I don't know whether it was a week in, 2 weeks in, a month in. Well, first of all, I'm half an eye on the clock here, but the first thing is I don't know how many Jays games you covered back in the Fergie days, but you know what the broadcast booth looks like in at Rogers Center. It's two-tiered. The two broadcasters sit on the bottom, and up it was at the time Bruce Brenner and
Yes.
Scott Metcalf and Scott Ferguson, and Fergie was beside the ticker tape machine getting the wire because again no internet, and we had wire services. So when I was told, and throughout spring training, nothing was told to me that would change my mind.
Mm-hmm.
That I figured I'd be up in the back. And we got to the first game of the season, and it was at Fenway, and they let me go on the road, which they didn't let me do again for like 12 years. But they let me go on the road for that first game, opening day 2002 at Fenway Park. And I walk into the booth, and there were 3 headsets set up in the front row. And I look at Brenner, and I'm like, "No, I'm here with you, right?" And he said, "No, no, 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 no. you go sit down in between the two of them and just go. And I could not believe it. And then we're getting ready to go. And literally a minute before we go on the air, and remember, just for context's sake, this is 2002. So the second Gulf War is raging at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I'm telling you this will be clear in a second. But a minute before we go on the air, Cheek turns to me and looks me dead in the eye. And he says to me, look, I don't care if you're Saddam Hussein. If you have something to contribute to the broadcast, say it. The mics are open. There's no hesitation. You're welcome to speak at any time.
Wow.
Right. Wow. Like crazy. So meanwhile, I didn't. I gave some out-of-town scores. But then in the ninth inning, the Red Sox brought in Uguet Urbina, and I had a cool story about him and how his middle name starts with U, and he's the only big leaguer with the initials UUU, and he has two brothers who also have initials UUU. So I told that story, and Cheek loved it. And from that point on, he just really kept an eye on me. And then a couple of weeks in or a month in or whatever, he sort of cornered me alone and dispensed some wisdom and was, firmly in my corner from that point on. We had so much fun together. We did the 10-minute chat before a game on the pregame show. And he used to talk about how he couldn't believe how well I knew the system and the prospects and stuff. And once he said, what about that kid in wherever, this Jose Jimenez kid? And there was a Jose Jimenez pitching in the Cardinal system or something, but he said another team. And in the minute, the seconds that I took to think, should I correct him? Or he just starts laughing because he made up a name. And, he's just trying to test me on it. He was the absolute best. And those 2.5 years I spent in the booth with him, I wouldn't trade for anything. I wish it had been a lot longer. And as for Jerry, Jerry has his Jerry way of doing things. I did not do things the Jerry way of doing things, but there was, he was still teaching, and he was still showing, and he was still a lovely partner. And I worked with him for 17 years, and I learned something from him every day.
Mm-hmm. Just a couple of minutes left here. How much? Oh, like 2 minutes. All right. So I don't even want to get into it. Here's what I'm going to say. There's clearly 1,000 more stories to tell, and I don't want to do injustice to your story and to the stories that we could tell about those 17 years and everything that came after, unfortunately.
We didn't even talk about 1 second of me being in the Blue Jays booth after 2002.
So this is what I want to do then. With due respect to the audience, I don't really personally, I don't know if you do, but I don't really personally want to do another hour right now. I've got some other stuff on the go. So I don't want to end this and just fire up another hour. Let's agree. See, this is the problem now. I'm only doing 1 a week instead of 3 a week. Whether it's next Wednesday, whether it's in a few Wednesdays from now, we're going to hit the pause button and we'll say this is part 1 of Mike Wilner, and it ends in the kind of Tom Cheek era. We will pick it up again, and we will talk about post-Cheek. We'll get into Alan Ashby and Joe Siddle, and then ultimately taking over in the booth yourself, and now the last couple of years working with Ben, and we'll get into all that on a future episode. So we'll just call this Mike Wilner part 1, but much more in-depth part 2 coming soon. We'll just leave it at that maybe, and then we can get into it. And even if it means once baseball's back, I'm sure we can find a Wednesday night where there's not a Blue Jays game where we can kind of chat for a couple of hours, for 1 hour.
Yeah, anytime. I'm happy to do part 2, 3, 4, whatever you want. It's been a lot. It's nice to just sit down and talk. And it's crazy that you and I are 1-2 in seniority at the Fan.
Yes,
we're doing this.
It is bizarre. And hey, maybe this spurs you on to get Instagram, Wilner. Now you don't have to come in for part 2. You don't have to come in as Eric Smith guest. You can be Mike Wilner. All right, 25 seconds left. The countdown is on my screen. So, Mike, thanks for this. Part 2, folks, with Mike will come soon, and we'll get into more stories from the booth as we count down to the start of baseball season. Looks like it's happening. Mike, thanks for your time, man. Stay safe and healthy.
Thanks, E. You too.
All right, and everybody watching, thanks so much. I'll be back tomorrow, but on the radio, Smith & Jones 1 to 2. Thanks, everybody. Take care.